you touched upon the idea that people don't know how to address difference of opinion. And very much within Islam, we have an idea that things are halal and haram, and therefore things that are haram are almost incorrect. And I was discussing with a friend, how do you accept that someone is wrong but still within the fold of Islam? And how do you educate someone to accept that within their Islamic thought? Particularly when most of education to children is very much indoctrination in the beginning before you open up their minds. And most people only receive Islamic education when they're children. So the question is kind of multiple.
Well, I mean, the basic answer to that is that, haram is not kufr. So I can be doing something haram and still within the fold of Islam. All right? I mean, I'll say this again. I get tired of saying it because I say it everywhere, but it is a very poignant insight into the question that you're raising. We know, and by the way, excuse me. And by the way, none other but then Ibn Taymiyyah is quite fond of quoting this particular hadith of a man who in the time of the Prophet ﷺ drank wine, and the companions would catch him, punish him, and curse him. And the Prophet said to them, "Do not curse him, for he loves Allah and he loves his messenger." All right? Now, yes, that's not me. That's our Prophet. Now, part of the point here is that Islam wants the best that we can do. Taqullah mastata'tum. All right? And the fact that I am addicted to alcohol, that's haram. There's no question, nothing. I mean, there's no debate about that. And personally, me personally, I'm not even willing to debate that kind of stuff. Is wine drinking halal? Is zina halal? Is ham sandwiches? I'm not even willing to debate it. No, I'm very serious. I'm not even willing to debate those kinds of things in terms of their status. All right? Are they kufr? Absolutely not. وَإِنَّ الْحَسَنَاتِ يُذْهِبْنَ السَّيِّئَاتِ ذَلِكَ ذِكْرَى لِلذَّاكِرِينَ. This is Islam. I have my flaws, I have my weaknesses, I have my struggles. All right? And if I or you, let's in this particular exchange, I'm just using it as a prop, if you are that interested in the moral fiber of the community, then what you want to be doing is not beating me down, but finding ways to empower me and raise me up. And this is part of the genius of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That he could deal with the human condition as it was, all right? And make better people, okay, out of the desert Arabs in Arabia, okay? Islam is a marathon. So, I mean, if you're asking me, so-and-so has a girlfriend, is that right? Of course it's not right. Absolute haram. All right? But one of the things I want to know about so-and-so, is he somebody who wants to be a good Muslim or just doesn't even care? You understand what I mean by that? All right? So there are all kinds of nuances here, okay? But the idea that just because someone is doing something haram, all right, they're kicked out of Islam, that's actually a khariji position. That's not the position of Ahl Sunnah.
So clarify the question. Sorry.
Let him clarify, because I don't want any misunderstanding on this.
The question wasn't about something that's clear-cut haram. The question is around something...
Oh, you think it's haram?
No, sorry. The question is about when there's something where there's two differences of opinion and a kind of legitimate schools of thought, where one sees the other as wrong. So, for example, the issue that came up was saying Merry Christmas. So someone said that is saying kind of completely haram and wrong. But then the other people said, no, that was completely legitimate. So the question is, how do you define things which are naturally contradictory, or kind of somewhat contradictory, but both are legitimate opinions?
Okay.
Rather than the clear...
Gotcha. See, this is my perspective on much of this stuff. I think that one of the things that Islam could reintroduce to the world, all right, and that would be a net benefit to the world, okay, is the idea that I don't have to believe that you are right to get along with you. I can believe that you are wrong, all right, okay? And yet, recognize that I do not have the authority, because I'm not ma'soom. I am not the prophet. I do not represent necessarily ijma'. I don't have the authority to impose my point of view on you. Most of the time we think of getting along, it's all about, well, who's going to give up their position? You follow? That's how we generally think about how to get along, all right? But just remember this, and I said this in Islam in the Black America. Just remember this. Ibn al-Mundhir, who died in 318, wrote a book called Kitab al-Ijma', where he cataloged, and by the way, Ibn al-Mundhir was a major scholar. He had a madhab of his own. That's how big he was, okay? Cataloged all the issues on which the Muslims had unanimously agreed, all right? It came out to be less than 200 pages. At-Tabari, who died in 310, so he's what? Contemporary, all right? Wrote a book, Ikhtilaf al-Fuqaha, 3,000 pages in manuscript. And yet, this is Islam's golden age. And this didn't rip them apart. This is Islam. Look, there's a Sunnis, and this is not a slap at Shiism, just relax. But as Sunnis, right, we recognize one man as being ma'soom, and that is Muhammad ibn Abdullah. As Imam Malik is recorded to have said, كُلٌّ يُؤْخَذُ بِقَوْلِهِ وَيُرَدِّ إِلَّا صَاحِبْ هَذَا الْقَبْرِ. Everyone's opinion can be accepted or rejected except the man who's in that grave right there in Medina. So in the absence of the Prophet coming back and saying that you are right and I am wrong, all right? Unless there's some kind of unanimous consensus on it, we simply have to agree to disagree. On the understanding, none of us are going to get out of here alive, and none of us are going to get away with anything. That's Islam.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Professor, thank you very much for a very stimulating talk. Two brief questions. You mentioned persecution and how it can act as a stimulant to religion and so on. If I could please take you back to the Black American history. My understanding is that the people who were taken as slaves from West Africa, maybe 35 to 40% were Muslims?
I don't think it was that high, but go ahead.
Maybe 20 to 30 or something. And they obviously endured persecution. Do you think that reality later on, much later on, resulted in the birth of like the Black Muslim movement and so on? So do you think that was the reason that these movements came out, for internal reasons? Because I've read stories about how they continued to practice for generations, but eventually phased out. The Muslims, right? Yeah. And my second question is your recent comment about domestication of religion. What you see in Europe and some other countries is what is being described as indigenization of Islam. Are they two the same thing?
On the question of persecution, I want to be very clear. I mean, I'm not a masochist. I'm not saying that persecution is good. And I'm not saying that persecution poses no threat to religion. But what I'm saying is that, in a sense, you might modify my words to say the most sustained threat to religion is apathy born of irrelevance. All right? I mean, you can wipe whole religious communities out, and you wipe them out, they're wiped out. That's a fundamental threat. All right? But persecution will, almost by nature, always generate an attempt to beat back the persecution. It will always generate an attempt to defend the religion against the persecutor. All right? And that attempt may fail or it may succeed, but it is more than likely, more likely than not, to be there. All right? Whereas with apathy, it's over. What is there to fight? It's no longer relevant. Okay? On the question of, you said, what did you call it? Assimilation, was it? Indigenization. No, to me, and we have to be, clear and honest here that, I mean, these words can mean a lot of things in a lot of different contexts. Let me give you my sense of what indigenization means. For me, indigenization is very distinct from assimilation. All right? Assimilation, in and of itself, presupposes a pre-existing sort of cultural orthodoxy, all right, which is established as the norm, and in which you are supposed to which you are supposed to adjust, all right, as a part of the price that's being paid for acceptance in society. Indigenization, on the other hand, and this may be a uniquely American perspective, and that's why I wanted to make clear I'm an American, all right? Indigenization, on the other hand, however, implies that you yourself determine, all right, your own cultural orthodoxy within the context of your society. In other words, there is not simply one way of being American. There are multiple ways, and this way is as legitimate as that way, okay? And one of the, I think, the advantages of indigenization is that, I mean, even for the American state, all right, once I have indigenized and I indigenize Islam, then Islam is at home in America. What point is there to be, in principle, against America if you're at home in America? You understand what I mean by that? All right? Now, that does not mean that being at home, all right, implies what I said earlier, domestication, where I can just applaud everything the state does. Sort of like Big Brother. This is George Orwell country, right? Winston, how many fingers am I holding up? All right? I'm not talking about that at all. In fact, I think that modern states are incredibly powerful. Their reach is incredibly far and deep. And I think one of the vocations of religion has to be, in some sense, as a loyal opposition. It has to be in a position to hold the state to a standard of morality and practice and use of power. And it cannot do that if it's domesticated. And when states don't have that, all right, then we end up with some really nasty things.
Final question.
Assalamu alaikum. I'd just like to thank you firstly. My question is basically in regards to one of your points you made earlier. It's the construction of this Muslim identity that you state. Now, it seems like within the historical construct that you've described in the West, the identity of Islam has been constructed as an other. And that makes it anthropologically a lot easier to construct. Whether it's in America, whether it's in the UK, whether it's wherever it is, in France, and described as the other to the indigenous population. Now, what you're kind of, I guess, proposing is the idea that we formulate an identity that's devoid of reactionary movements on these periphery. But how does one get out of the Hegelian dialectic? Because at this point in time, the existence of the Islamic communities are all based on that. We don't have an Islamic community that's devoid of that. So we are almost starting at an antithesis to society in some form, in some construction. I mean, how far that antithesis is obviously, the polarization is devoid of discourse. But so how does one get out of that and then get down to the center and start discussing things on issues rather than on conflicts? Because that's how it seems like the narrative works. I guess that's my question.
But don't take the mic for a second. I wanna engage him a little bit. I mean, look, in a general sense, I see much in your articulation that's of value. One of the things, and it makes a difference between whether you're talking about Europe and America, all right? But one of the things that I've been trying to ever so subtly tiptoe up to is the reality of recognizing the extent to which we as Muslims have been complicit in our own othering in the societies of which we happen to be a part. And to the extent that that's the case, what is it that we need to unlearn, all right, in order to cease to be assisting those who want to alienate us within society in that very alienation? So I think that that's a discussion that we need to have, a very difficult one, all right? Because after all, the whole question of identity, all right, is one in which, you know, I set up circumscriptions that mark me off from you. All right? That is a reality when it comes to any identity. All right? But I think that, and again, I'm investing in an American perspective here. I don't know the extent to which this is relevant in England or Europe in general, but I mean, I think the question becomes one of, well, whose society is it? And to what extent do I accept and therefore surrender to claims of that very ownership? And I think that, you know, look, to be frank about it, you know, Aimé Césaire, the Martinican intellectual, says in his discourse on colonialism that, you know, there's some very silly people who argue that colonialism is over. No, physical colonialism has ended, but the psychological colonialism, persists, and I think that, you know, part of what we have to come to terms with is, you know, whether or not we as a Muslim community are really infused with a sense of mission as Muslims, which in and of itself is one of ingratiation with society, all right, on the condition that we can live dignified existences as Muslims, all right, as opposed to the post-colonial one where to see myself as holding anything in terms of identity in common with those who colonized me, all right, who sought to disabuse me of my religion, who placed my religion in this status of inferiority in the world, all right, that's a very difficult thing to do, all right? And so part of it, you know, depends on our own internal discussion. And it's a very difficult one, okay? But I don't think that any Muslim community should have either as its stated goal or something that it tolerates, the erection of false barriers between society and Islam.
Sorry.
And here I will speak about England. You know, biryani should not come between British people and Islam. If you get, that's just a synecdoche, but you understand the point that I'm trying to make. You know, and this entails quite a bit of management. All right.
Sorry, can I just? It seems to me that we're going back, and again, I mean, maybe I'm just skipping numbers here, but it seems like we're going back to epistemology again, because the fundamental discourse moves on epistemology. It does, irrespective, because the Muslim world, in inverted commas, or the archetypal Muslim theologian does not work within the framework that we, as the West, grow up with, i.e. the French Revolution infused deconstructionist methodology that we basically grow up with. Now, so that discourse therefore breaks down at the point where we think, oh, let's sit down at a table. Now, I guess the question would ultimately mean that we probably need people like yourself who have had to get up and answer those questions. I guess that's going to be in the future almost, like that's the mediation of that positioning, isn't it?
Well, yeah, in a certain way, I think you're right, and this is what this is one of the reasons why I said that one of the first issues that Muslims in the West have to address is this whole epistemological issue. But let me say this in this context. I don't think that we as Muslims should misread the reality that we're living, because much of the apathy that younger generations of Muslims experience, all right, is an apathy that's generated within Muslim communities. It is not simply a matter of how Muslims and Islam are able to address issues outside the Muslim community, all right? And so there are regimes of disempowerment that are afoot within our communities, okay? And we have to address those as well. And no amount of, addressing these issues of epistemology, and so you can believe in God and be a respectable, human being, all right? That's all fine, and that's very important. I would never diminish or bring down the significance of that. But in terms of the lived reality of Muslims, I mean, that's going to have much more to do with the social fabric of our communities, within our communities.
But isn't that social fabric constructed out of the way that that's taught? So, I mean, I guess I think you're absolutely right.
But why? But why is it taught that way?
But isn't that, again, going back to the epistemology, because of the fact that the people who are teaching buy into an epistemology?
No, it's not all epistemology. And this afternoon I'm going to get into it. It's not all epistemology, because the epistemology is about this. The fundamental issue is here. It's not here. All right? And that is one of the things that inspired this book. How do we get to here?
Explaining Sufism to people to only mention the riyadatun nafs aspect of it and to ignore the mystical / experiential part? And secondly, when did people start, if ever, calling themselves Sufi? So was this something which they brought upon themselves, or was it something which has come recently and people have described them in the past, as you mentioned?
I mean, the answer to the first part of your question, I think what I would say is that it's dishonest if I mean to be dishonest. The mere fact that I mentioned Ibn Ata'Allah as a Sufi, or I mentioned this work as a Sufi work, and don't mention anything about, say, Wahdat al-Wujud or pantheism or any of those kinds of things, I don't think that's dishonest, in as much as that is not the thrust of this work. Now, I'm not saying that, or even implying that no Sufi has ever implied that, but I don't think I'm being dishonest just by not mentioning that, any more than I'm being dishonest when I say fiqh, all right, and avoid certain problematic fiqh opinions that some jurists have had, all right, in the Hanafi school, in the Maliki school, in the Shafi'i school. You understand what I mean by that? So, am I being dishonest when I say Shafi'i fiqh, but I don't mention problematic views of Shafi'i? Astaghfirullah, akhi, what you talking about? Problematic views of Shafi'i. Right? There are, trust me. Malik too, by the way. Abu Hanifa too. I'm not. Walaikum salam.
As a former Christian like yourself, when did we stop believing in God as Christians concept, and when did we start believing in God as the Muslim God? I mean, is there a boundary, is there a difference in that? Is it upon Shahada, or is it upon a class of Aqidah, or what is it?
Well, when you say when we stop believing in
God, like we disown, or we leave, or we say, I'm not a Christian, and then we say, now I'm a Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a point where we could say, or someone could say, now you believe in God, or you never did? Because when you come into it, you have certain beliefs about.
So let me. I'm trying to read into your question. Just bear with me. So am I to understand that there are Muslims who would tell you that you never believed in God before, because that wasn't God.
Yes,
all right.
Yeah.
Now you believe in God.
Yeah.
All right. I disagree with that point of view.
Yeah.
Now, why can I say that? I mean, the Quran itself, in many areas, وَإِلَهُكُمْ وَإِلَهُنَا وَاحِدٌ. Do you follow what I mean by that? Now, what I don't believe in is your theology, your understanding of God, and as well as the authority of the religious tradition that upholds that understanding of God. All right? But even the Prophet himself told us the best of you in Jahiliyyah will be what? The best of you in Islam, if you learn the religion. All right? So I believed in God before I was a Muslim. And I've always personally found atheism to be just a very, I don't get it. I don't get it. I believed in God. But the fact that I had a problematic concept of God does not believe that I didn't believe in God. Okay? And let me, you know, well, let me just say this. You know, you and I are friends. You know, I get to know you at the university, and we become very tight friends, very close. And I come to know you as a very honest, trustworthy, and upright guy. All of a sudden, I get a call. What's your name, Akhi? Ijaz. I get a call. Ijaz has been arrested. All right? And he's been arrested for being an axe murderer. Right? And I say, whoa, wait a minute. I know Ijaz. I know he is not capable of this kind of thing. I know he didn't do it. All right? And, you know, you go through this trial and everything and all that, and Ijaz is acquitted. Okay? You get off. All right? But then I found out his name ain't really Ijaz. All right? And he really wasn't born where I thought he was born. Right? And he's really not the age I thought he was. All right? Now that proves I did not know certain things about you. Does that prove I didn't know that you were an upright person who would not do ex-murderers? Ex-murderers? Does everybody follow what I mean by that? The fact that I don't know some things about you don't mean I don't know you at all. I might get some things even wrong about you. Doesn't mean I don't know you at all. So I got something wrong about God. Some concepts wrong about God. No, I believed in God. All right? All right? In the same way that I believed in you, although I didn't know your real name, I didn't know your real age. You follow what I mean by that? Okay? So no, I don't subscribe to that notion that, well, you know, before I was a Muslim, you didn't really believe in God because that was no. I had a problematic concept of God. All right? And so did many of the Sahaba.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. I'm just curious as to why you needed to actually use the term Sufis, especially since the greatest Sufi, of course, is the Prophet ﷺ. In that sense, all knowledge emanates from Ali radiallahu anhu, the tariqas.
Well, I understand something. You're asking me why I had to use the word Sufi, but, of course, the Prophet was the greatest Sufi.
You know what I mean?
No, I don't. Be honest
it's such a loaded term, and I'm sure what you've mentioned in Ibn Atallah's book, it's Islam. It's basic. Why use a man-made construct, which itself has so much bad press about it? Why do we need to necessarily go down that route in the first place? Well, you could have said everything that he said without actually using the word Sufi.
I don't think so. I personally don't think that this is a problem that can just be avoided or swept under the rug. This is a part of our modern legacy, and I think that hopefully what this will do, this will animate a more honest and a more courageous discussion, so that we are not people in the modern world who have this sort of childish approach to religion that says no aspects of our tradition can be problematic. These are, as you said, fiqh, usul, even theology. All right? These are attempts, to negotiate the meanings of Scripture and Revelation by human beings in real time and real space. No human institution, all right, is likely to be a permanent validity. They always have to be monitored, all right, to make sure that they are absolutely the best that they can be. Okay? And the worst human institutions, the worst, are those that don't include in them mechanisms for recognizing and eliminating error. Okay? Because in that case, you have to pretend that there is no possibility of error. All right? And so error then can ultimately parade as truth, because you don't have the mechanisms for detecting it, let alone eliminating it. So I don't think that this Sufi controversy, it's not just going to go away. The issue is, can we manage it more effectively?
No, what I meant was,
Yeah, yeah.
our aim is to refine, as you said, to refine our consciousness.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. I produced this book, no Sufism, no nothing. Just refinement of the self. All right? and some, some Muslim reads it. Yeah. MashaAllah. Ooh, yes. And then he goes to the masjid. I was reading this book, and it's about this guy, Ibn Allah. It's about, he's a Sufi. No. Can completely undermine his confidence in this text. We can't hide from this stuff, all right? And I hope that again, this will raise us to a level of accountability, responsibility, and honesty, all right? That will actually enable us to do a better job at managing our own legacy. All right? We are a storied community. We can't get away from that. All right?
I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. What I meant is the ideas that are in there, the ideas that are in Muhasibi, etc. Why couldn't you have taken those ideas and produced a book without any of the trappings of these?
Oh, I see. No, I see. Let me. This is my own personal view. I could have done the same thing with theological tolerance. I could have done the same thing, as you said, with Sufism for Non-Sufis. Inshallah, there's a book coming out next year about the Gama'ah Islamiyah in Egypt, the guys who killed Sadat, all right? And turned around and said, no, we were wrong. We shouldn't have done that, right? I could have just not translated their works and just dealt with the issue. But for me, for Muslims and non-Muslims, this tradition is in some ways lacking credibility. And I want to restore that credibility by saying in their own words. Right? Because if I just do it, I can leave this out and emphasize, and I hear scholars do this all the time. When you talk about, you emphasize this and, depress that, depress this, emphasize that, but in his own words, this is what he says. All right? This tradition about which we have all these problems, about which the non-Muslim world is, up in arms, and in their own words. Here it is right here. All right? You want to talk about religious tolerance? Show me a work in Christianity or Judaism that does what Al-Ghazali does, in his own words. Not me, some modern apologist, in his own words. All right? Ibn Allah, in his own words. Not me, some modern apologist, Islam Ameriki, no. In his own words. All right? And I think it's really important to do that, to restore our confidence. I don't mean mine, but all those Muslims out there, to restore their confidence in their own heritage. All right? And to let them know we have nothing to be ashamed of. And if there are errors, this, that, and the other, well, the greatest scholars that we respect are precisely those who detected and sought to eliminate error. That's what it means to be a human community. All right? But I think it's important to have their own words at this stage. Now, a couple of generations from now, in the West, we might not, we may be able to dispense with that. But I just think that now, at this juncture, that's really important.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you so much for your talk so far. Personally found it very inspirational. I just want to ask you, sort of run a question by you, which is to what extent do you think, I'm thinking particularly of this, what you describe as a raging debate between what you might call the sort of the utter transcendence and then the kind of immanent aspects of God. And it's something that exercises me quite a lot. So to what extent do you think it's actually just a problem that arises because of the finiteness of our human minds? And that and that there's a problem that God is beyond any human conception ultimately. God is infinite and all these things that we're not. But we have to conceptualize God in order to relate to him at all, a little bit like when you talk about the wall. We can't worship or love a wall. In fact, we'd be committing shirk if we did. But we have to somehow bring God into our conception. And to what extent is that actually the origination of this dichotomy, do you think, and this raging debate that maybe we can find a way of dispensing with so that we can include this whole range of thought that exists within the religion?
My own response to that would be this. I think that the immanence transcendence debate is going to continue as long as we approach religion as an exclusively rationalistic enterprise. I think that the gap, in a sense, between transcendence and immanence is filled not by synthetic rationalistic attempts to join the two in some kind of way, but by religiosity. Do you follow what I mean by that? That's where the bridge is ultimately made. All right? We cannot conceptually, I don't think it's possible to conceptually do it. All right? But that's, in a sense, the whole point of religiosity. And I think, pardon the word, I think Sufis have recognized that for a long time. And not just Sufis, there are others. All right? But that's what I think. And I think that, I don't want to offend anybody, but I do think that there are some problems. I mean, now we're stuck in this mode. I hope you'll pardon me as an American. This sort of European cult of genius. You follow what I mean? Everything is about how rational it is, and rationality being the only access we have to any reality. And now we as Muslims are stuck there. All right? And then we want to try to get people to sort of realize the truth of Islam by purely rationalistic presentations alone. Right? I mean, just imagine those of you who have gone on Hajj. All right? Just imagine what that does. All right? No, I'm very serious. I mean, an experience that I remember. I'll say this and I'll stop right now. There was a brother, we were on Hajj together, and we came into the haram, and we came down the walkway, and he lifted his head, and he said he looked at the Kaaba and just started crying. Right? And then he said to me, he said, when I go back home to America, all those people who want to say, why you believe in God, just whatever. No, this is real. I mean, that's religiosity, all right? And we cannot do this thing just by this alone, okay?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
You mentioned validation a lot and how we as humans tend to look for validation from other humans, more so than our creator. Just wanted to find out, is that due to it being couched in our personal insecurities, or is it due to a lack of awareness of our creator, or is it both? I mean, that constant need.
Both and neither. How's that? No. I think that, look, the reality is that we are human beings. We are not self-sufficient, and we will require a certain degree of recognition, if for nothing else, our basic status as human beings and the respect that we are owed as human beings. These are very important things that cannot be simply ignored. And if you think about things such as, the Prophet himself would say things such as, if there are 3 of you, no 2 of you whisper. All right? Why? Because the 3rd of you then internalizes the sense that he is less respected, less valued. All right? And, that's a part of who we are. The question is not simply one of, do we seek validation or do we not? The question is, number one, on the basis of what do we seek validation and how much validation do we seek. And when we have healthy communities, all right, people can acquire the validation that is generally required of human beings in a way that is healthy and does not, all right, come between them and God. When we don't, okay, then look, human beings will seek validation in healthy or unhealthy ways, okay? The importance of refinement of the self, all right, is that informs the intensity, the level, and in a sense, you know, the quantity of social validation that we need. But the idea of we will, you know, unless we're going to be hermits or something like that, that we will be able to do without validation at all right? As the Prophet said, we are hammam. We are anxious by our nature. That's a part of it. Look, can I know that I'm handsome by myself? No, I'm very serious. I'm very serious. I'm not joking now.
No, self-image, yes.
No, I'm sorry?
Self-image, you can be handsome.
No.
You can't, somebody has to tell you.
No, I can say I'm handsome, but when do I know that I'm handsome? Forget handsome. Can I know that I'm smart? How do I know I'm smart?
Compare yourself with other people.
Huh? Right, and usually they are like, you know, there are formal representations of that. You know, I have this degree or that degree. You follow? That's who we are as human beings. Only God is self-sufficient. God knows himself independent of anybody else. We can't do that. All right? Okay? And it's an amazing thing that in some ways, you know, the most evil people on the planet, they know that and exploit it to their advantage. You follow what I mean by that? All right? We ignore it and therefore ignore the necessity of coming up with healthy regimes of validation. You follow what I'm saying? And this has its impact on us cumulatively. I mean, as a community, all right? And this is something that we, again, speaking to the texture of our lived collective experience as Muslims, this is something that has to be addressed. So I don't want to give the impression that, you know, we are something other than human beings, all right? But to the extent that this nafs, okay, is unrefined, undisciplined, put on a diet, all right, it will push us to pursue regimes of validation that are about nothing but the decibel of applause that we get in society in which we live. Because this thing is blind. All it wants is satisfaction. It doesn't care how.
Professor, you gave two examples, plus you touched on another one. So if I could take the last one where you referred to the Mongols drinking and the view taken on that, and also a sister being hugged by Giuliano. My understanding is that what people like about Islam is the clarity and the simplicity of this message in terms of what is right, what is wrong. There are always isolated cases where an individual has to make a decision, such as in the case of the sister. But to assume that that could be followed as a general norm. And
to assume that what?
To assume or to suggest that this could be followed as a general norm, you know, I think then we are on a slippery slope.
Can I say something here?
Please.
Let me be a little bit blunt here.
Yeah.
I mean, this argument, in some ways, has hamstrung and stymied us for generations. Of course. I mean, Of course there's a potential slippery slope. All right? But just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean you're not being followed. You didn't get that?
No.
Okay. Just because there's a slippery slope doesn't mean that, I mean, you know, to me, one of the things that in some ways modernity has done to us, it has robbed us of our basic confidence in human nature, especially Muslim human nature. Because our presumption is what? You give the Muslims one little inch, they will what? Why? Yes, of course. Hugging is haram. We all know that. All right? Why would it turn into, we say, a general norm? Either ignorance, number one, all right, or people simply want to exploit, all right, what should not be exploited. Okay? But that fact itself should not paralyze us. All right? And this is what tends to happen.
Professor, with due respect, you know, you are causing a degree of confusion the way you're presenting this.
Mm-hmm.
I think the fundamental problem is we as Ummah have not understood the concept of change. And not only that, but how to manage change. If you manage change yourself, you're in control. And you do it according to the notions you believe in or subscribe to. Okay, so when we go to different societies, whether it's changing in civilizations or in our own situation, we have never been in control. The Muslim Ummah for centuries, and is playing second fiddle or pleasing other notions or whatever. And that is the fundamental problem. And that links in with the comment you made earlier on about being patient. Okay, and that's a recipe for not doing anything, just patiently waiting for what? But if you understand that how change works, you prepare yourself for the moment that where you can influence change. I can go into details, but I'm sure you understand. One recent example is, you know, I'm aware of this debate of Islamic economics since the 60s, 70s here in Britain and elsewhere, and a lot of work has been done. When the crisis came, and nobody said Islam is the alternative, this is how you address this. They've been patient, writing, but they're not prepared. There's no system in place to even consider. Do you understand? So patience, being patient, doesn't really help very much, it just passes time. And that's what we've been doing. Preparedness and understanding change is equally important. And as I have the mic, and just to wrap up about the last comment about Sufism, you touched on very fundamental pluses about Sufism. And I'm a beneficiary of that and have been, especially in my younger days. But with age and time, I have become somewhat skeptical. As I think the Americans call it, a regular Muslim or something. My reference point is the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, and if I look at Sufism, they just look at how he prayed at night and so on. Forget what he did during the day and other challenges, and to focus on simple things like very important, highly valued things like purity and self-purification and ibadah and getting close to Allah is fine, but not ignoring the rest of his life, social engagement, accountability, financial management, you know, all sorts of issues. Just simply ignore them and focus on that. That is not Islam, and that has to be challenged. And a lot of our problems here are with serious problems. You go to Sufistic people, they don't understand the concept. They get elected, they don't think themselves, consider themselves accountable to people. No, it's a spiritual leader to Allah.
Can I respond to you now?
Yeah.
Okay. You said the way that I'm articulating this is confusing people. If it's confusing you, then I think that perhaps it's because you haven't fully, I don't mean you personally, this is not personal, okay. No, but I'm just telling you, this is not personal. Perhaps you have not been able to step away from where you are right now, all right, to the point of really being able to listen to me, okay? Because the reality is that you talk about anticipating change and controlling change. You don't always control change. The Prophet didn't always control change. I mean, this is a reality, all right? It's a reality. If you don't think it's a reality, you think you control change? Do you think you control change?
Allow me to answer. My own clarity. If you want an answer, I'm happy to give it.
Sure.
I work for a
Let-
company.
Sorry, if we could.
Let him go. Just one minute. The point that I'm making here is this. What you say about slippery slopes, all right? No one's talking about a slippery slope. No one's talking about going from an exceptional situation. Would Ibn Taymiyyah say, okay, that's it, let all Mongols drink? Is that what he's saying? Whenever you see Mongols drink, just let them drink. No one's saying that. No one's saying that. No one is saying that. I didn't say it. None of the examples that I gave represented that. All right? That's number one. The reality is that reality is not always going to be formal, as it should be. All right? And even when you think you're controlling change, you are not in control. Allah is in control. And He may throw us circumstances, all right, that have been totally unanticipated. How then will we react? That is the issue. My point, all right, is that with a strong constitution, all right, and an understanding of our religion, we can navigate these in such a way, all right, that we can reasonably entertain God's pleasure, and we can preserve the coherence of our community along the way, all right? Now, with regard to some Sufis who do this and do that, I hope nobody got the impression that this was a presentation that said, well, all Sufis are angels, and that there are no problems with Sufism. Fuqaha do things. Theologians do things. Non-Sufis do things. That's not the issue, all right? And if that's the pattern that you want to follow, and that's the pattern that you want to follow. It has nothing to do with this or what's being advocated by this, all right? And I don't think it's fair for anyone to hold Ibn Atta'Allah or anybody else responsible for all of the misapplications, all right? The lack of sincerity, the lack of commitment to issues to which they should be committed. I don't think it's fair to hold him responsible for that. There are people all over the world who are simply irresponsible, or they don't understand, or they're cowardly, or they have some other agenda. I mean, that's there. I don't see how the fact that some Sufis might do that, all right, turns into a condemnation of Sufism as a whole. And if that logic is accepted, all right, Islamophobes would love you, if you get my point.
I think you hijacked my point.
So can we
Can you stop?
We can have a sidebar.
Can you just respond to his point where he says that he goes back to the Prophet ﷺ and looks at the Prophet ﷺ's holistic life?
Part-time Muslims, you can describe them as very selective and ignoring the whole of the...
This is just nonsense.
There's no nonsense.
It's absolute, utter nonsense.
Okay, tell me- okay.
No. Sufis, I'm not a Sufi, all right? So this is not some defense of Sufism out some personal, private position, all right? They married, they fought wars, they were teachers, they were business people, they were all over the place, all right? Now, is that a vindication of Sufism as a whole? No. Depends on what it's doing. But to say that Sufism per se, meant that these were people who ignored life in the community and went off to the monastery and let life go as it would go and had no engagement in the life of the community. Were there some who did that? I'm sure there were, all right? I'm sure there were non-Sufis who did that, all right? But to take this as a characterization of Sufism as a whole, this is simply not true. Simply not true. That is not the historical role that Sufism has played.
okay, thank you. Can we get them to this question? Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. My question is sort of evolving the point. And I think it's not just about one guy hugging a girl and the fear of other people dying, but it's a lot more subtle than that in our lives. And I just got embroiled in this a big debate, unfortunately, online about Merry Christmas and people making takfir on people who say Merry Christmas. And for me, it was me just discerning in my own self and my community, me working in a mainstream institution, then I didn't have any issue with it. And I felt I had the authority to do that, and that authority was questioned. And then it was only later than a fatwa by Sheikh Ali Jum'a, someone put online that said, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. And it was really interesting to see all these different discussions taking place. There's two things. The first thing is, who has the authority to make decisions like that, and should we have the confidence to do that? I know, for example, in France, I have a lot of friends, Muslim sisters, who shake hands as a custom, because if they don't shake hands, they'll get kissed. So they put their hand out beforehand, so they don't get kissed, because the culture is there to kiss, so they don't want to get kissed, so they put their hand out. And seeing that from outside, I thought, oh, these sisters, or other people, rather, not me, other people comment, oh, these sisters are really dilute armchair Muslims, blah, blah, blah. Actually, they've been doing a lot of thinking about, minimizing the bad and maximizing the good. So who has that authority to make that call? That's the first thing. And the second thing is that we're always going to have detractors who are just gonna hate on you and gonna call you a kafir for giving your next door neighbor a Christmas card. So to what extent do we entertain that discerning or dissenting voices? Yeah, Jazakallah.
Well, I think that in general, we as a Muslim community, I think we have to re-establish the sensibility about takfir. The Prophet himself warned us about doing that, and even said that one of them is going to have that redounded upon them. Look, let's suppose, I believe that saying Merry Christmas is haram. But let's suppose that I also know that you happen really to be ignorant. You just don't know. How is your ignorance kufr? Kufr is juhud. It is a rejection. It's not just ignorance. All right? That's number one. So this whole business of takfir, people need to be really, really very careful about that. Really very careful about that. That's number one. Number two, it's a mukhtalif, excuse me. It's a mukhtalifi issue. The ulama themselves differ over whether you should say Merry Christmas or not. All right? And so, and it's very strange that, people will come to you and say, well, you don't have enough authority to make this determination about whether you should say Merry Christmas or not. You need to consult some sheikh. Well, you consult a sheikh. And he says you can say it. Oh, no, he's just what happened to the criteria? All right? This is a part of what we constantly engage in. All right? And sometimes, I don't think you should say Merry Christmas. I'm not going to say Merry Christmas. If you and I get in a discussion about it, I'm going to say, I don't think you should say Merry Christmas. Or vice versa. You follow what I'm saying? But as a part of Muslim civics, we've got to learn to live with the fact that other people have other opinions, period. Other people have other opinions, all right? And it's really quite desperate, when that can only be greeted with takfir. The only argument that I can produce, all right, in the face of your point of view is to call you a kafir. Wow, that's brilliant. That's ingenious.
But sometimes this is like, these guys, in one of these arguments, but these guys have studied whatever, and they're coming up with 101 reasons you're promoting shirk, you're encouraging, whatever, right? Long essay, and for the most part, people, let's say I'm simple, I'm not studying, I don't know much, but for me it makes sense. There was a sister, and I watched this video online in California, a sister who was crying, asking the sheikh, can I climb a tree? I don't know if I can climb the tree. Because she had this complex that people are going to see part of my body and that it's haram, and someone said, no, you can't climb the tree. And she can't climb a tree without seeking that validation. So that's the complex that we're producing.
Yeah, that's a major problem that we have. And one of the considerations that has gone almost missing in action among our modern Muslim conversations is, also fil ashya al-ibaha. I don't need a reason to say this is halal. You need a reason to say it's haram. All right, and that's been completely taken out of circulation. And so again, much of what plagues us, a lot of it is self-inflicted. All right, and our future, all right, and the health of our community as a community is very much dependent on our ability, to get some of this toxic energy, out of our community. We're supposed to be, a community that loves one another, man. When Allah talks about, removing love from a community and placing enmity and hatred among them, that's a curse, man. That's not a blessing, that's a curse. All right? And one of the things we need to really work on getting back is, we got to get some love back in our community, man. We have to get some love back in our community. It's just that simple. And so, the question that you asked is actually a bit more complex. I mean, on some issues, you have the authority because it's simply a factual issue. On other issues, you need to consult somebody who has knowledge of fiqh, of the sources, of Islamic law, who can tell you, this is what the ruling is based on the cumulative results of this discussion among the fuqaha over time. This is the ruling. Okay, fine. Or this is maybe his own ijtihad. Okay, fine. All right? That's coming from the sources. But on issues of fact, I mean, if he tells me, if you have a headache, you don't have to fast. Okay. Who's going to tell me if I got a headache or not? So I'm going to go back to him and say, Sheikh, do I have a headache? I mean, that's a factual issue on which I make the determination. All right? And if that sounds strange to you, maybe it's because it's so uncommonly discussed among us as modern Muslims. But let me assure you of one thing. This is not Dr. Jackson's opinion here. That's Shihab al-Qarafi from 800 years ago. Explicitly. All right? And he's in the Muwatta of Malik. He's a Maliki, Qarafi. It says, if you say to your wife, Anti Khaliya, this is a triple divorce. It's in the Muwatta. Qarafi says, yes, that was the custom of Malik's time because the Prophet gave us no explicit formula for initiating divorce. And it certainly wasn't that. The custom of Medina had developed to the point that that's what they used to initiate triple divorce. Now, in my 7th century contemporary Egypt, nobody uses this to say that he's divorcing his wife. Therefore, this no longer constitutes divorce. Although it's in the Muwatta. All right? That change in custom breeds a change in the ruling. And that's a factual assessment. Malik could not be there to determine what this meant in 7th century Cairo. 7th century Cairenes have to do that.
Doesn't everything just become like relative then?
No, it's not a matter of relative. Custom is relative. Divorce is not relative. That a man has a right to divorce, it's not relative. The legal effects of divorce is not relative. Right? The child custody coming out of divorce, it's not relative. All right? It's like, we have this strange mentality. To say that, well, if I change a button on my jacket, I've changed the whole jacket. Some things change, some things don't. I don't understand what the aversion to recognizing change as a reality is.
Morality. Where is the fixed point? If somebody nowadays, say anything about homosexuality? No. Homosexuality. This is not something. So this is what I'm saying.
No. Wait. This is not homosexuality like zina, like fornication, like adultery, like wine drinking. These things are not based on custom. They are based on nusus. Now, there may be exceptions, if you understand what I mean by that. All right? Such as if a man said something to his wife that amounted to a divorce. He didn't know it amounted to a divorce. He has sex with her. Technically, he's committing what? Do we punish him? That's an exception. You follow what I'm saying? But we're not talking about relativity with regard to the authority of these nusus. We don't have that moral relativism like that unless it's based on custom. Now, custom is a very... Shatabi talks about this, all right? In some Muslim countries, you would never find a man without a turban on his head. That's not necessarily the case in places like Spain. All right? Okay? And so when we start talking about, things like customary practices, they're going to change from time to time, from place to place. And when the ruling is based on that, I'll give you another example. Go back to the books, Hanafi books. Go back to Maghinani. And go back to, Bab al-Nikah. And look at what he says about the home that must be provided for a woman. And see if it has indoor plumbing. And see if it has electricity. Are any of those homes going to have electricity in them? Are the fuqaha going to have it as a shart that you must provide this woman with a home, with indoor heat, with indoor plumbing, with indoor electricity? Are any of them going to say that? What is that based on? Today. Can I say, no, honey, look. Based on the custom of Mother Ghinani? This is what we're talking about. Does she have a right to a home? Does she have a right to maintenance? Etc., etc. All right? Much of that is filled in, however, by what? Custom. What is the custom? What is the home? What is maintenance? All right? Some of the issues we haven't even discussed. Healthcare. Well, you don't have this in England, right? Y'all, okay, it's an American thing. Never mind. But you understand what I mean by that, all right? In America, would I be responsible for my wife's healthcare? Right? So we're not talking about, moral relativism. That is not what we're talking about when we simply say we recognize change, all right? Change is recognized only when it occurs with regard to the factual realities, okay, upon which these ahkam were based. And when those factual realities change, so do the rulings that govern them. In fact, Al-Qarafi himself says, holding on to rulings that have been based on past custom is a violation of unanimous consensus and an open display of ignorance of the religion. When they change, the ruling changes. And that is not moral relativism. And we should not allow ourselves, to be sort of bullied into, that box as if every time we recognize change, we're engaging in relativism. We're not.
It seems to me they're symptoms of the same issue. And the issue becomes this reductionist view of what Islamic law should be, i.e., I should be prescriptive. If X, then Y. If Z, then A. Right? And I think this basically allows the rest of us to be stupid. Without sounding condescending, it basically demeans our intellectual capacity to the point where we are following without any intellectual exercise whatsoever. If X happens, then I should do Y. Right? And I think in this, where almost the whole moral capacity of our existential reality is taken away. And to me, that demeans the nature of humanity, in essence. I think the fact of the matter is your point that you made, I thought was really interesting in regards to the lady with the mayor of New York. Now, to me, that doesn't require a discussion. It's for the lady to decide at that point in time. But the problem becomes that she becomes symbolic. So she becomes the focal point of every single person in this room's opinion on her. And I think that's exactly what we don't need to snap out of. It doesn't actually necessitate us to have a complicated discourse on the logistics of, the maqasid of this of the Sharia, or whatever you would like to call it, is X or Y. We almost need to step back, and I think this is the point I think Ibn Atayla is trying to make, is that
Yeah, but I think that, I mean, most of what you said, I think that I think that I would generally agree with it, although I have to come back and say that, look, it is our duty, and this is not something that, you know, is a part of some aspect of Islamic intellectual history that we can either accept or reject. I mean, this is basically Quran. You know, we are a community that is bound to command what is good and to forbid what is wrong. And that places us in a position of a certain amount of communal responsibility, particularly towards those actions that we may take that potentially have communal ramifications. And so with regard to the woman in New York, I think that that is a valid and legitimate topic of discussion for Muslims to engage in. And I think that that, along with many other issues, will be issues that are legitimate topics of discussion for Muslims to engage in. Perhaps even Merry Christmas, all right? The problem that I have is not that, it's not whether we engage in these issues or not so much, as is the fact that we don't have any rules of engagement. And therefore, as a result, it is always, our engagements are always a zero-sum proposition. It's a zero-sum game. Either you are 100% correct and I'm the fasiq, or vice versa. And I think that is what is problematic about where we are now, in a context where we are more likely to be confronted with more issues that need to be discussed and debated on a communal level rather than less. And if we don't find a way to establish civil ways of engaging these issues, what we will end up with is a thoroughly impoverished discourse among us as Muslims.
Where would these rules of engagement come from? How do you come about it?
Well, I think that, I mean, look, the issues that we're engaging are issues of Islamic law, essentially. And that is, excuse me, that is essentially the domain of usul al-fiqh. That is the domain of legal methodology. And I want to be very clear about something, because I know that when these kinds of things are mentioned, you know, the average everyday Muslim says, well, I'm not going to be some legal theoretician. What am I going to do? Learn Arabic and learn all, I mean, just to be a regular, everyday Joe accountant Muslim, I mean, who prays 5 times a day and fasts Ramadan. I mean, I don't think it's necessary for all of us to master those disciplines per se. But I do think that we as a Muslim community could do a much better job on a much greater need for more general dispersion of what I would consider to be Islamic literacy. And therefore, for example, when it comes to simple things like, well, I mean, this is one of the problems that we have. You know, much of this discussion was regulated in pre-modern times by the fact that literacy itself, general literacy, it's the ability to read and write, was itself limited. And that in and of itself had the effect of limiting the pool of participants in, you know, these kinds of debates. Well, now, you know, everybody can read. Everybody has access to books. And now the internet. And so what we have is all of this general literacy, all right, that is not matched with even a modicum in many instances of Islamic literacy. And so I'm going to read the Quran, and I'm going to read the Sunnah, and I'm going to read something that, you know, is a command, and I'm going to immediately assume that, you know, that implies obligation. Whereas, you know, a basic premise of Islamic literacy would say, no, it may imply obligation, it may imply recommendation, it may simply imply permission. I mean, these are all 3 possibilities that are universally recognized about the fuqaha in terms of how we interpret commands. If we don't have that, all right, and you say it's command, and I say, well, maybe not, without rules of engagement, you are more likely just to dismiss me as somebody who's lukewarm in their commitment to deen. Right? And that's part of, I think, you know, we need to do a much better job at. People are not going to stop reading. You're not going to stop that. In fact, it's going to get worse. I shouldn't say worse. It's going to proliferate more rather than less. And without those rules of engagement, we're likely to have some very difficult conversations
I guess-
that don't really necessarily lead anywhere.
Sorry, I mean, I guess one of the issues that I always foresee in this is that in this age of modernity, and especially with telecommunications the way they are, right? In the classical age, i.e., the Middle Ages, when the Islamic fuqaha were doing whatever they were doing, right? It was very the fiqh was very specified. So when you had notions of necessity, where a faqih would give a ruling, it would be out of necessity, therefore you can do X and Y, right? Where it's not a general command to the awam. Now, it seems to me that within the construct of modernity, it's near now impossible to give a ruling out of necessity, because what happens is that, as the gentleman just said, if you basically, as a faqih, say, oh, actually, you know what, it's permissible for you to do this in this instance. Nobody listens to in this instance, right? People just eliminate that part of your, and then on YouTube it'll be like, you know, Professor Sherman Jackson gives this fatwa, and I think it's almost, I guess, at the risk of sounding overtly critical, I think it's probably the reason why a lot of the fuqaha just opt into very, very conservative positionings. And that doesn't help our ummah. It just doesn't, right? I mean,
but see, that's why I'm saying the cure to that is a greater proliferation of Islamic literacy. Because you have to hear that under those circumstances. And you have to understand that under those circumstances empowers you and renders you as an individual responsible for making that factual assessment. Are those circumstances obtaining now, or are they not? And if they are not, then that fatwa does not apply to me. All right? I mean, and this, by the way, this is nothing new. It goes all the way back to the time of the Prophet himself, alayhi salam, and he tells the companions themselves, all right? You people come to me with your cases. إِنَّكُمْ تَخْتَصِمُونَ إِلَيَّ. And some of you may be more eloquent at presenting his evidence than others. I, on the other hand, I simply rule in accordance with what I hear. So if I should grant to one of you a right that he knows rightfully belongs to his brother, let him not take it. Because in such instance, I will simply have cut out for him a piece of the hellfire. You have an obligation. He's saying, I'm the prophet. What I tell you comes from God. But that's only assuming that the facts that you have presented are actually the facts that obtain. And if you know they are not, you have the obligation to say, no, I can't do that, although the prophet told me I could.
Okay. Yeah. So we're going to go back. We'll come. Right. Yeah, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair. From the age of 7 until I graduated from high school, I went to an Orthodox Jewish Hebrew school. I studied Hebrew, I read the Torah, I read a bit about Kabbalah, not the celebrity Kabbalah, but actually the Jewish mysticism, which is much more mystical and pantheist than what we've been discussing today. Obviously, I'm a Muslim, born a Muslim, went to madrasa.
I'm sorry, you're what?
I said I should state that I am a Muslim and was born a Muslim.
Can you just come forward a bit, because we can't hear you at all, this microphone's not on.
I said I should state that I am a Muslim and was born a Muslim. The question I have is that the Jews say something very interesting, which is that you shouldn't even discuss or try to learn Kabbalah until you are at least 40 years old. What I found interesting about that school, this is an Orthodox, not a liberal Jewish school, not a conservative, an Orthodox Jewish school, is that there was an utter and total disconnect between what we learnt at school, Jewish studies and Torah, and the behavior of everybody in the community, children and adults in the Jewish community. There was no connection, there was no taqwa. There was, and I'm not saying this to disparage, there was no sense of shame, zina, alcohol, everything which happened in the normal secular community happened just as much in this community, and there was no sense of of any striving towards it. You learned the rules, you learned the arguments, you learned the Torah, and then you put it aside and you went out and had your lunch. The question I have is, so that rule about only coming to this later on was based on a theory that if you came to it early, it would, they used the phrase, it would cut down your trees, it would destroy your faith. Do you think that we should be thinking about these aspects of Sufism once your foundation of your basic Islamic knowledge is there? Or do you think that it's important at the beginning so that you soften your heart and you create a close relationship with Allah as you are learning the basics? Thank you.
I mean, that's a very good question. And my opinion on that would be predicated upon an understanding that, again, to reiterate a thesis that I hope that I've made several times and that has arrived to you in the form that I've made it, and that is that this Sufi expression here, all right, is not primarily about mysticism, not at all. And it is about refinement of the self, the inculcation of internally driven religious piety, the alignment of the pre-rational, of the human will with the divine will. And I don't think that that is something that any Muslim, as a part of Islam, not as a part of some aspect of Islam, but as a part of Islam itself, can postpone or put off or put to the side. Because the reality is this. We have to understand that, see, Islamic law is primarily about limits. It is primarily telling us, I mean, other than the ibadat, it is primarily telling us that your actions must fall within the confines of these regulatory boundaries, all right? But Islamic law does not tell us what we should pursue in life or how we should pursue it. You understand what I mean by that? I'm not talking about Jannah, but in a general sense, all right? And so the state of my preconscious self, I mean, can render me so susceptible to the pullings and tuggings of a society, all right, that is itself not necessarily linked to or indexed into any regime of divinely inspired values, principles, or rules, all right? I can get lost in that, all right? And I think that one of the things that many of us will admit, if we're honest with ourselves, is that, you know, some of the biggest mistakes that we have made in our lives have been grounded in decisions that we ourselves were perfectly and absolutely free to make, right? In a sense, our undisciplined passions pushed us in directions that were not good for us. And I don't think that putting ourselves in a position to avoid those ravages, all right, is something that can be postponed. And one of the big mistakes that many of us as Muslims make is that we think Islamic law is going to handle that, all right? There are many things that are halal, all right, that may not be good for me, all right? Allah's not going to come to me with every single, and many of us think that because it's halal, okay, it can't be something that may cause me difficulty, right? People have that look on their faces. I mean, you know, there are all kinds of things that are halal. It's halal for me to marry this woman or that woman or that woman. You follow what I'm saying? Islam is not going to tell me which one of those to marry. And if I make the wrong choice, I'm going to pay for it. All right? And what many people think is that, well, wait a minute, well, it was halal. How can this not be right. All right? Well, maybe my undisciplined passions, all right, blinded me, all right, to the point that I could not see things either about her or about myself that I should have seen. All right? And on the basis of that, I made a wrong choice. All right? And then many of us end up, we're mad at Islam, we're mad at Allah. Because we made choices, all right, that delivered us to places that we don't want to be. And it's all based on an inability, all right, to discipline our passions, okay, in such a way that they don't push us, all right, into goals and aspirations that are actually not good for us. So I don't think that there's any room for postponing what we're talking about here, which is not mysticism, with one exception. I mean, there's a mystical element here, and it's primarily the mystical element that has to do with the ability to acquire supersensory knowledge, and that we are not simply reduced to the power of our minds per se in terms of the employment of linear reason in order to be able to arrive at knowledge of certain things. There are other ways of knowing that a refined self can promote. That's primarily the sort of the mystical dimension of this, and I don't see any point of postponing either of those. All right, but I hope that we will underscore the point that I made. Just because it's halal is not going to guarantee that this is going to work out well.
Assalamu alaikum, Professor,
Walaikum salam.
brothers and sisters. I've got two questions, but before I start, I'd want to say, if there are any Christians in the room, I hope you had a very happy Christmas. And the reason that I say that is because my mother was a Christian, my brothers and sisters and so forth, and you spoke earlier about America, where Reverend Sharp, what was the name again?
Al Sharpton.
Yeah, when he said, all of the people here are brothers and sisters, and I hope that's the way it's going to be in this country in the future, where it's not strange to be a Muslim, we're brothers and sisters together. The other thing that I wanted to say, you asked a question earlier, is Sufism haram with regards to the pantheistic element that we led into? I think one of the liberating things about being a religious person is being able to hold contradictory opinions at the same time. Yeah? And there are certain things in the Quran which I understand at certain levels, others I don't. So I don't think there are. But I understand it's not for everybody. And the other thing that I find is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that the role of the Sufi sheikh in society in the past has been to kind of gently guide people, and sometimes quite strictly guide people. And I think it has led to, it's led to good mental health in society generally. Now, in the West, mental health isn't what it should be. And also in the Muslim community, I think it's not what it should be. Do you think that Sufism and the role of the sheikhs could help in this regard?
Depends on the quality of the sheikh. Well, I mean, in the same way that that's almost like asking, do I think that therapists could improve the mental health of a particular community? It depends on the quality of the therapist. I don't think that there's anything automatic in having a Sufi sheikh that necessarily results in the improvement of the mental health of the Muslim community. In fact, depending on who and how they execute their business, it could have the opposite effect. And see, I think that, you said something earlier. I think that if I might put it in some ways in my own words, I mean, bears repeating. I mean, Muslims want to be off the hook. You ain't off the hook. Each and every one of you are us, not you, us. Each and every one of us is ultimately responsible before Allah. And one of the things, the tricks you should not play, Qaddafi talks about this, and I'll send you that article. Stop trying to take the ulama as bridges to the hellfire. right? I mean, Qaddafi talks about you got these Mamluk soldiers in Mamluk Cairo, all right? They're going around robbing people and then saying, no, we're not robbing them, this is a loan. When we get it, we're going to give it back. And then they come to the faqih and say, what? A loan's halal. Right? And what he said, what he says is, again, the faqih has to be up on and aware of what's going on in the society. Because if he just says yes, all right, he can end up condoning this very despicable behavior. So he answers very circumspectly, all right? If it is in a halal manner, with full
Ownership.
with full consent and what's the word I'm looking for? I'm getting tired now. Huh? Not just discussion, but full agency exercised on both sides, where there is no coercion and no fraud. Then, according to the religious law, yes. If not, no. Right? And I think that, we need to be very careful about this as a Muslim community. And it's not just here. I've seen it, in many, many communities that I've been in. Somehow we think we're going to get to Jannah by proxy. We're going to get to Jannah or not by the lives we live. And we have to understand that ultimately we are all responsible. Now, that's not saying we're all responsible for the same things. You follow what I mean by that? All right? But we are all ultimately responsible. Okay? And this is a part of what we have to, I think, recommit our commitment to. Living Islamically responsible lives. All right?
I was interested in a kind of political issue, I suppose. And it kind of follows on a little bit from what this brother over here that was wearing a red, he is wearing a jumper still, he's over here asked earlier. I think this is the sense of what perhaps he was trying to communicate as I heard it, which is what would you say to somebody that said, listen, it's all very well you talking about patience and a kind of slow period of maybe of cultural acclimatization, or however you want to look at the process you've been describing. But look, we live in a society that is sort of kind of pathologically hypersexualized. There are billboard-sized posters of practically naked women plastered everywhere. We've got rampant consumerism and a prevailing and very powerful culture that promotes, using all these new media techniques, the idea that happiness is to be found by simply consuming products. And the patients just won't hack it. This is just you're peeing into the wind, so to speak. This is what this isn't actually my opinion, but as an opinion you may hear a lot, and I can kind of hear it as this gentleman was speaking. Really, that won't do, and you need to have some sort of much more politically activist version of Islam before you can even have any of these kind of benefits that you're speaking of and holding out as a prospect for us.
Well, I think that first of all, it's a bit unfortunate that, in a room full of Muslims in the 21st century, we can still use the word patience and have it understood to mean resignation. This has never been the meaning of patience in Islam. How many times does it occur in Quran? Does Quran tell us to be patient? Does the Quran tell the Prophet to be patient? Fasbir? Does it say that? Does it say that time and time again? Does it tell him, just ma'lish? That's not what patience, that's not what sabr is. It's perseverance. It's perseverance and placing your trust in Allah. And it's an understanding, all right, that ultimately you do not determine the outcome of the affair. I do what I am able to do. I do it assiduously with all due diligence, all right? And for me to put myself in a position where I am able to act, but I don't act, all right, that is not an exercise of patience. And I'm quite frankly, I'm just a little bit surprised that, Muslims are still understanding patience as resignation. I don't know why anybody would think that, all right? But patience literally means this. It means to tie down Qutila sabra means that he was killed tied down. All right? Patience means to be able to remain in motion while tying down those emotions that might complicate that enterprise. Tying down anger, tying down fear, tying down the quest for vengeance, tying down selfishness, right? I mean, tying down all these things that could complicate the whole enterprise of staying in motion towards the realization of that goal. All right? So that's what we're talking about. And that can be political, that can be artistic, that can be economic, that can be physical, fighting, that can be any number of theaters. All right? But I think it's really important for us to understand that ultimately, and see, this is where, we borrow from the utopias of the modern world and turn Islam into a utopia. All right? And end up with all these guaranteed solutions to everything. If the Prophet could not guarantee, who are you to guarantee? Who am I? إِنَّكَ لَتَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. Do you know who Abu Talib was to the Prophet? Do you know who he was to him? He loved him like a father. It ain't up to you. It's not up to you. I mean, so, we have to be very careful that we don't reduce Islam to just another modern utopia. All right? And these utopias are killing us. And I would argue that one of the number one killers of marriage in our community is these utopian notions of marriage. Nobody can live up to these. I mean, you know, people watching television, they've been rehearsing for 9 hours. And, I mean, 3-hour makeup jobs, you know what I mean? And here you are, you comparing your life with this stuff. I mean, my wife makes me mad, I mean, she's not a good Muslim. Husband makes her mad, oh, he's not a good Muslim. Astaghfirullah azim. I mean, these kinds of things. And again, we don't follow the example of the Prophet. We don't follow the example of the Prophet, alayhi salam. All right? Because what Islam is really supposed to do, it is supposed to imbue us with the ability to confront with dignity anything a human existence has to throw at us. That's what it's supposed to do. Because that implies real, live tawakkul ala Allah. And if you think tawakkul ala Allah is easy, you got another thing coming. All right? And in this book, Ibn Ata'Allah says, the most beloved form, the most beloved act of obedience to Allah is trust in Him. Is trust in Him. All right? And as he says, وَالشَّكُّ فِي الرِّزْقِ شَكٌّ فِي الرَّازِقِ. This is who we are as Muslims, man. So I hope I'm not being too harsh here, but I mean,
we need it.
No, but why would we be? Why would we interpret sabr to mean resignation? That you just sit there and wait to be slaughtered, like cattle. Who? Right? So again, yeah, there may be political activities we need to, there may be economic, all right? There may be all kinds of activities, but I think that we need to be very, very aware of false panaceas. You're talking about false universals, but false panaceas. Because in life, very few issues admit of final solutions. And one of the fears that I have, and I've seen it from place to place, Muslims engage in a very slick sort of secularization of Islam. All right? And I don't mean what many people mean. What I mean is that, and these are pious Muslims, but they think that they have the final solution. And that's what we're supposed to be putting together, the final solution that ultimately renders us with no need for God. That's what we want. Solutions that relieve us of the need for God. I don't want those solutions. I want the best I can come up with, and then That's Islam. And maybe we'll learn that the easy way or the hard way.
Thank you. Just on your opinion on, I've been to a few dhikr circles where there's a group of Muslims in a mosque and they repeat Allah's name over and over and over, sometimes for hours, sometimes approaching us almost like a trance state. I don't know, what's your opinion on it? Is that considered to be still an Islamic practice which is to be recommended, or is it a little bit extreme? What do you think?
Talk about dhikr as a whole as well, Jamie. That was my question.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, there are hadith in Sahih Bukhari that says, that the Sahaba used to do dhikr after prayers. I mean, look, I mean, you asked me about that specifically. That's something that I personally probably wouldn't be all that comfortable with, but that doesn't mean I have a fiqhi opinion on it. I don't know. I haven't started. I mean, I really have to, sort of investigate that kind of thing. But I don't particularly have a fiqhi opinion on it. And if I walked into a masjid and they were doing that after salat, I'd probably just, very politely make my sunnahs and leave or something like that. But probably not. But that doesn't mean it's haram. That's just maybe some of my Protestant sensibilities coming out. I mean, or I shouldn't call them Protestant, but you understand what I mean by it. No, we all have sensibilities. We're all born in a place and time. I mean, if you read some of these hadiths, some of the things that the Sahaba used to do with the Prophet. I mean, his spit, his hair, his sweat. I mean, whoa. Clearly he didn't see it as shirk. Now, I mean, my sensibilities in modern times, I don't think I'd do anything like that. Doesn't mean it's haram. I mean, so you ask me, would I join? Probably not. Would I say it's haram? Probably not. Unless, I'm not saying it's not haram. I'm saying I don't have a fiqhi opinion on it.
Is there a reason why it's not in his book?
What? No, dhikr is in the book. He talks about dhikr as dhikr is our obedience to God is not simply in terms of what we do, but in our state of being as well. And psychological obedience to God, all right, according to Ibn Ata'Allah, is most effectively executed through dhikr, the remembrance of Allah. All right? Now, that's just dhikr. All right? Now, where it goes after that, right? And, this is what we constantly do. All right? We have in mind, but then we just ask about dhikr. You follow what I mean by that? And whatever I say is going to be wrong and right, or so, it depends on what you're talking about. Dhikr is just a remembrance of Allah. There are sound hadith, let your lips be wet with the remembrance of Allah. Dhikrullah. That's there. All right? Where it goes from there, I don't know. But I don't see anything, in my understanding, that would ever say that dhikr in and of itself is haram. So many hadith where the Prophet is instructing us about how to do dhikr, what to say in dhikr.
Could you tell us the origin of the word Sufi or Sufism? I read one and I heard something else. I'd be interested to know what your opinion is.
Well, the opinion of scholars of Sufism is that the origins of the word remain controversial, and no one has any definitive evidence as to where it comes from. Most generally agree that the word is from the word suf, which is a nisbah or related to the coarse woolen cloak that many mendicants and people who have made vows of poverty would wear. We do know that some of the early Muslim scholars Ibn Sabi'in and others were very they condemned this practice because they saw it as an imitation of Christian monks and hermits. Others, however, say it doesn't come from Suf, it comes from the word Safa, i.e. Purity, and that these are the people of purity. Still others say no, it doesn't come from Safa, it comes from Ahl Sufa. These were the poor excuse me. These were the poor people, who took refuge under the canopy of the Prophet in his mosque, alayhi salam. So there is no unanimously agreed upon scholarly consensus on the etymology of the word Sufi. But again, the most popular thesis among those that are promoted is that it comes from the word Suf, wool.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
I
salam.
would like to ask a question about the dimension of Sufism that are normally associated to Sufism, but especially the opponents of Sufism doesn't really appreciate, such as التوسل والاستغاثة والكشف. I haven't got the book yet, so I don't know if it's covered in the book or not. But how should we answer, or how should we, our belief or response in regards to these dimensions should be, whether we are Sufis or non-Sufis?
So let me see if I understand your question right. So how should we respond to the charge that Sufism promotes tawassul and kashf?
توسل واستغاثة وكشف. Yes.
Tawassul and istighatha. Well, kashf is, depending on what you're saying is becoming makshuf, that will determine, if kashf is literally sort of the lifting of the veil as a prelude to the ontological unification between humans and God, that's one thing. But kashf does not, probably not even most of the time, mean that. And so there's nothing, the word kashf itself, I don't think in and of itself is not problematic. Tawassul and istighatha, as I'm sure you know, these are highly debated and contested categories. And some would hold them to be shirk, and others would say no. And trust me, I've heard arguments on both sides. And I think that where you have disagreements that are entrenched and long running, I think that individually, دع ما يريبك لما لا يريبك. Because you might not know. You follow what I'm saying? I have doubts about this. I'm going to be careful with my religion. All right? And that's it. Look, it's just like Shiism. You think that it's been going on for 1,300 years. We're going to solve this problem today? We're going to solve it? We're not going to solve it. All right? The madhab, they've been around for what? 1,200 years. You going to get rid of them? There are going to be certain aspects that are a part of our storied heritage as a Muslim community that we are going to have to learn to live with. And it's not to say, and this is one of the insights, and this is what I was trying to allude to earlier. Do Muslims believe that Christianity is true? You guys got hesitations about this? Do Muslims believe that Christianity is true? That Jesus is the Son of God or God incarnate? My goodness. Where am I? Right? No, but see, this is the point that I'm making. All right? And yet, did Christians have a right to live in Muslim society? Yes. To practice their religion? Yes. To eat pork? Yes. To drink wine? Yes. to educate and raise their children as they saw fit. Who else did this in the history of humanity? While saying, we don't believe that you are right. We don't even believe your religion is correct. And yet, politically, you have the right to practice it.
Yeah, but my question is sometimes, the debate between Sufis and non-Sufis get to the extreme, especially in places like Saudi Arabia, where they're destroying the heritage and of the Islamic culture and history, or other places, like for the purpose of renewing the mosque and removing any possibility of creating shirk and tawassut and istighatha. I don't know how valid or how can they validate their attempts, for instance, and whether it's acceptable or not, it should be acceptable by other Muslims or not. This is.
Should ask me more for a position. What position should we take on it?
On?
Istighatha, tawassul.
But as I said, I mean, these are. You're not asking me my personal opinion. You're asking me. You are?
In general.
Yeah, in general. And what I'm saying is that, you see, this is the problem. Look, if you're talking about, I want your personal opinion, that's one thing. If you're saying, what is sort of the going opinion among scholars? I mean, the reality is that this is a contested issue. And you will find just as many scholars, all right? And I'm not talking about a little low level, I'm talking about high scholars who will say that tawassul and istighatha are not shirk and they're not haram. Others will say, no, they are shirk and they are haram. It is a contested issue, a disputed issue, a mukhtalaf fihi issue. You follow what I'm saying? And therefore, there will never be a single answer that will please all of the parties to the debate. And this is why I'm saying I think I'm assuming, I think it's wrong, or I think it's okay. I have to be willing to recognize that there are going to be people who hold the opposite view. And I think, this is only my personal opinion, take it for what it's worth, one of the diseases that we have imbibed in modern times is this habit of thinking that even most issues are going to present or going to admit of a single answer. That's what we want all the time, the answer. All right? When I teach Introduction to Islamic Law, this is the non-Muslims in the academy. I mean, one of the first things they learn is the difference between an Islamic position and the Islamic position. All right? And an Islamic position is not necessarily the position that I think is right. All right? All right? When Malikis say that dog saliva is not najis, do Hanafis agree with that? They believe it's what? Najis. And that opinion is what? Wrong. I mean, no. I mean, no. I mean, no. I mean, they believe that the Maliki opinion is wrong. No, they believe the Maliki opinion is wrong. All right? What are they going to do, attack Malikis now? They're going to say, well, we think these...
Can I just sharpen this a bit more, this question? I just want to sharpen it.
Uh-oh.
It hasn't come through. The question, the sister was asking about istighas and tawassul. I think the question is, are they from secondary grey area issues, or are they from kind of hard, fast doctrines that if we believe this, or if we don't believe this, we're a Muslim or a non-Muslim? I think that will be.
But I don't think we can make that determination. I mean, look, I mean, I've read some of these debates on both sides, and I could say, you read Yusuf Adijwi and these kinds of people on these kinds of issues. I mean, these are people who are making. I'll give you one example. I'm not supporting it one way or the other, and I'm gonna stop after this because I can see where this is going.
I have a much more interesting question. You can spend time or rather on the dog.
There are ulama who would say, I can ask you all the time to make dua for me, can I not? The only difference between you and the sheikh in the grave is that you're alive and he's dead. Right? All right? Others would say, no, no, no. But you are investing, because he's dead, supernatural powers in him. And supernatural powers, all right, by right, okay, belong only to whom? So you get, there is going to be no definitive answer that is going to satisfy, you know, all parties to the debate. And one of the questions that I have, quite frankly, is why are we debating this in the West?
Okay, seeing that this might be the penultimate question, and we're beginning to broach the edgier aspects of tasawwuf, which I have to confess are more fascinating. I wonder if I could be bold enough to ask the Sheikh to indulge the audience by sharing with us his thoughts on the connections that we find in the history of tasawwuf, and particularly the shalt, you know, the erotic outbursts of many of the Sufis. So the connection between the Sufi practices, desire and eroticism. Anybody who's cast a, you know, even a cursory glance to Sufi literature, even the Sufis that are shuyukh, that are reasonably well known in the community, can't have failed, will have noticed that there's a propensity in a lot of their writings and of erotically charged verses which describe their experiences and their relationships with the divine.
Yeah. Basically, which chapter is the erotic chapter?
Is there the lover beloved trope, again, is largely absent from this book. Again, Ibn Ata'Allah is, in my estimation, intentionally avoiding these more potentially complicated aspects of the Sufi tradition. I think that with regard to what you said about eroticism, I'm not sure that I mean, when you start talking about loving God and ishq and things like that, I'm not sure I would characterize that as eroticism. I think it is very definitely grounded in sort of amorous sentimentalities. But I mean, it is I think a very laudable civilizational achievement. And I'm not talking about, you know, what some scholars talking about, you know, ashab al-mujun. I'm not talking about, you know, those kinds of things. But I mean, the idea that you could have, I mean, a highly suggestive erotic expressions that are somehow still maintained within the confines of what is considered to be a very elegant, and respectful, and sort of controlled a context. I think that's an enormously powerful civilizational achievement. And I do think that, again, eroticism that does not sort of, is not aimed at the promotion or proliferation of zina. I mean, this is something that is also, I mean, likely to be an important part of any Islamic civilization that is able to compete on the world stage in the world that we live in. So I don't think that, you know, Muslims should necessarily, I mean, we should not become, I know I'm in England, but malish. You know where this is going. I mean, we should not be. Well, we should not become overly prudish in the way in which we recognize this dimension of the human condition. That is not a part of our tradition going all the way back to the Prophet himself. And I'll tell you this little tidbit. I mean, one of the things that was attractive to me as a convert, even reading the Quran in English, was, the fact that the Quran could talk about, sex in one verse, angels in another verse, Musa in another verse, and figs in another. In other words, there was this integrated sense of reality, and life was not compartmentalized in the way that many religious discourses tend to do it in the West. So yeah, I agree that beauty, eroticism, these are issues that are also going to be part of the sort of cultural authority that hopefully Muslims will be in a position to achieve and deploy, all right, in ways that actually reflect, the sensibilities and the values of Muslims and not of others. Just aping them because it's sort of one-upmanship, as it were.
I think the important thing that I wanted to ask is that shouldn't this be part of a basic induction to intelligent ways of looking at things?
Shouldn't what be?
Just teaching basic tasawwuf. Now, whether we use the word tasawwuf or intelligent ways of looking at human nature or, the instructions that, in your book, that should be part of basic education.
Well, I think my answer would be a bit more, just a slightly bit broader than what you suggest. I think that not only tasawwuf, but any number of articulations of what, for lack of a better term, might be called Muslim wisdom traditions. I think that this, yes, should definitely become a part of the Muslim library, especially in the West. And I think that there's a lot there to be benefited from. Some of this has already been translated, but it's been translated in a sense in such a sort of exclusively academic motif that it is not likely to have much circulation among a more general population. But yes, I do believe that these are extremely valuable repositories of religious literature that can go a long way in refining the sensibilities of Muslims and inspiring them beyond the realm of just linear rational thought, which tends to be our bigger obsession in these days.